Welcome to this week's edition of the Construction CPA's Coffee Cafe. I am the Construction CPA, Lisa Raish. We are dropping the hammer on cash flow problems so you can build things that matter. And I don't have my microphone. Almost completely ready. All right. So what are we talking about this week? So this is going to be the second in our Profit Leak series. And so we're going to be talking about the backlog illusion. So contractors many times are going to celebrate the large number that they have in backlog, but in reality, they have poor cash flow and their profitability is slowly eking away. So many of you will have, plenty of work. I have plenty of work in the calendar. But again, it's business, it still feels tight, right? You don't have enough cash coming in. You're not as profitable as you thought. So again, there's kind of this illusion of what the backlog really actually means. So again, we're coming into the season, right? Many of you will have a large amount of backlog to get you through the warm season, but you're still stressed about where's the cash going to come from, in order to actually produce these projects. So that's what we're going to talk about today. So we'll talk about your backlog, why a lot of times it really is a misunderstood number. It's the assumption that it is actually revenue and it isn't yet. So, let's talk a little bit more about that. And love to hear from you. So drop in the comments if you've ever had backlog that you thought was a great, huge number, but you know what? You just don't have any cash in the bank. All right. So why does your backlog matter? So backlog is simply your future work, right? That's the work that you're going to be doing in the future. It's not guaranteed work. It's not guaranteed cash flow. And in many cases, bad backlog is going to create operational stress on your business. Again, that backlog might be something you've contracted for, but again, unfortunately, sometimes things don't happen, things happen and maybe it isn't right. So it's not guaranteed revenue, profit, cash flow, none of that. It's just going to be future work that you have planned. So the size of your backlog is not about the actual quality of that backlog, right? It's got to be good quality work, profitable work. Just because you have 3 million in backlog, if it's 3 million of very unprofitable work, it's not going to matter. Let's find a way for you to get to a point where you've got 2 million in really profitable backlog, because that is going to put you in a better position than to say, oh, I have $4 million in backlog to go through the summer and, it's barely profitable. So, the real problem is that a lot of you have your backlog, but there's really no control over the margin, right? So how profitable the projects actually are. So what we see a lot is contractors are chasing volume, right? So as I just mentioned, it's, oh, I have $5 million in backlog for the summer season. Well, again, we're chasing that big number. Let's just say, I want this big number. Again, it's not quality work, but I can run around saying I have $5 million in backlog for the summer season. So you might be taking on low margin jobs just to, again, throw stuff in that pipeline. You might be underbidding to stay busy. We see that all the time. I need a little, we've got a small patch of time. I need to keep my guys busy all season. So again, let's keep them busy. Let's fill in that backlog. And sometimes you ignore your capacity or the limitations on the capacity. So you're just throwing all kinds of backlog in there, not really in knowing, or maybe knowing that you actually can't service all of that. Sometimes there might be too much. No job goes perfectly. So sometimes you have overruns here or there, schedules get moved out, and then suddenly, again, you have a much shorter period of time and you're trying to do all of this work. And if it's low margin work, all it really ends up being is busy work for you. So growth is going to create operational strain on your business. And again, not all growth is good growth. It needs to be quality growth. So, you're going to put strain on your crew. If you are, again, trying to keep them busy, you're going to put a lot of, in some cases, overload on them to keep them busy through the season. You may run into scheduling challenges, as I just mentioned. You might find that one schedule changes and now the thing that you had planned out, down here, now they're kind of over running on top of each other. And now you've overloaded your crew because you're trying to do all of this work, sometimes almost all at the same time. You have the chance of increasing the mistakes that you make on projects, right? Nobody wants to go back and make fixes. That's time and that's money. And then you put admin pressure on the team that's working, operationally in your business, not just the crew out on the project, but whomever's working in the office, ensuring that everyone's getting paid every week, that all the bills are getting paid for whatever materials that you've purchased. Whoever's in there trying to manage that schedule and moving guys around and trying to get them here and there, right? You're putting pressure when you've got uncontrolled growth, not good quality growth. You begin to put pressure on all aspects of your business. It's not just the crew that's out there, physically working on the project. It's all of your team members. The other issue you're going to run into, with the real problems that we see with backlog is now you've created cash flow timing issues as well. So we always talk about cash flow and the timing of it. And so now if you're layering on backlog and you're layering on unprofitable backlog and backlog that's now falling, projects are now falling on top of each other, now what happens? You might run into somewhere along the line a retainage delay. There might be slow billing somewhere across the line. Unfortunately, it is chronic in the industry. Many of you are waiting 60, 90, 120 days to get paid. So you're waiting forever to get paid, but your vendors, your material vendor wants to get paid, your subs want to get paid. So again, now you've created a whole slew of timing issues on top of unprofitable projects. You're putting strains on your vendors, your outside vendors, especially if you're utilizing subcontractors. Now, you're not only putting strain on your own team if you have team members that are doing the actual work on the projects, but you might be utilizing subs for some of your work as well, right? So now your timing, the chaos, it's not profitable. You're trying to get people in, you're trying to get people paid. All of these things are happening. And again, it's all happening all at once. But hey, you've got $5 million of backlog, right? Again, if it's garbage backlog, it's not profitable backlog, it's not really going to matter. You're just throwing a lot of chaos into your business. And then at the end of the day, also the last thing, is making that payroll every week. So you've got payroll strain, right? So you've got cash flow problems and timing that you're running along with this backlog as well. So the backlog isn't actually going to pay your payroll. Your cash flow management does that. So again, just because you've got 5 million in backlog doesn't mean you can make payroll this week or next week. So those are the kinds of things that you really need to think about. Your weak margins are going to hide inside of that backlog. But what happens is you throw so much in there and it's garbagey backlog, and maybe you've kind of slowed down some of the peaks and the valleys in the cash flow. But as that garbagey backlog begins to peter out, as you move into a slower season, what happens? It really starts to present itself. It shows you how, wow, you had $5 million in backlog, but guess what? It was barely profitable backlog. So yes, that 5 million revenue top line number looks very impressive. But, when the profitability fades away, and it fades away sometimes very quietly as you get into sometimes your slower months, that's where you notice like you really have a problem. It's, that 5 million in revenue that's coming in and the cash is coming in and going out, it kind of masks it. And again, as it peters off, you start to see where you really have your issue, that it wasn't profitable work. You don't have money in order to pay that next batch of things. So what happens is again, that large amount of backlog is mistaken as stability, and it really isn't. So again, backlog is just a number. Like anything else, your backlog, just like the work you're doing today, it needs to be quality revenue and profitable revenue. If you're just stuffing things into the pipe just to have something come out on the other side, in many cases, you're just creating more. You think you're fixing it, but you really aren't fixing it. In many cases, you're making it worse because now you've got to unwind that bad upon bad upon bad. So we want you to have backlog, I would rather see many of you with a smaller amount of backlog, but good quality 20, 30, 40% margin backlog that is profitable to you and that you're not squeaking every single penny of profit out of it in order to make that next payment. So, how do you build healthy backlog? So, you know, it's not just building healthy backlog, it's building healthy revenue, right? You need to have strong margins on all of your projects. You need to look at every single project when you are bidding them out and bid them out so that you make money on those projects, not just to say, I got another project in the door. The healthy backlog is you have to control your scheduling. It trying to throw one project on top of each other. We all know none of these projects are ever going to flush out the way that they're supposed to. They're never going to be on time. So something in there is going to hiccup. So this back to back to back to back to back projects that you've created, in some cases, just creates more and more chaos. So you need to control your scheduling. Look at your capacity, right? Plan out how much your team can actually do. If you're not controlling your schedule, then how are you going to manage the capacity, which is your team? How do you manage them if the schedule is out of control? You're not. You're just sending them all over the place and you're overloading everyone. You want to have a reliable billing system. We see it far too often. There really is no system in place. This tends to be one of the things that we look at first and foremost. How are you billing? Whenever you're billing, do you have a process around it? All of those things that you have reminder system, like all of that. If you don't have anything around that, if you're just kind of billing whenever and waiting to get paid, it's a cash flow problem waiting to happen, to be honest. And you want to take all of this backlog and now create some level of accurate forecasting with this backlog, right? If you have this backlog, let's forecast out what it needs to look like in order for us to be profitable, for the cash to flow appropriately, for us to not worry about getting paid the next time. I can't make payroll on Friday, right? You want to have profitable backlog because that is going to create stability in what you're doing. You're forecasting out profitable work, not just forecasting out work, because unprofitable backlog is just going to exacerbate any stress that you currently have in your business because you aren't profitable, because cash is tight, because all of the things that are happening in your business. So, what are some of the things that you can do today, right? These basic kind of actionable tips, things that you can take away today. First, you need to review your projected margins on every project before you accept the work. Don't just take the work on just because, oh, I need to take the work on. So my guys are busy in the month of July. That doesn't help you, right? Review whether that's profitable. No, we don't want to see your team not working over that month. But if you've taken on work that isn't profitable, it doesn't mean anything. You're just making things worse for yourself. You need to measure your capacity honestly. How much can your team honestly do on a weekly basis, a monthly basis? You need to measure all of those things. You've scheduled out for the next 6 months, but can your team actually do that work? If by no, if nothing happens in any of these projects, they all go off without a charm and there's nothing happens and it doesn't take a day or two longer. When you are, again, putting one project on top of each other, you're not really considering your capacity honestly. It's, oh, okay, well, I'm again stuffing all that work in there as much as we can do. And now you've got overruns and it's taking you longer and the projects don't ever go off the way they're supposed to anyways. So the schedule you've created kind of gets blown up right out of the gate. So again, measure your capacity honestly. Forecast your cash flow along with your backlog. You should be forecasting your cash flow at least 13 weeks out at the minimum. You want to see what you have for cash flow in week 5 and week 8 and week 10. You need to know what's going to happen in at the minimum the next 13 weeks, but then also in the months after that. So you should always be projecting your cash flow, not just what you've actually got for revenues right now, but considering that backlog in there. I know this can be hard, especially if you're trying to keep your team busy, but avoid taking work just to stay busy. The busy work is usually the work that bites you in the behind. That is the work that ends up costing you more money than you actually think that it will. And, like anything else, prioritize profitable backlog over having a huge amount of backlog. I would rather see all of you with 2 million of really profitable backlog instead of 2 million in backlog that isn't profitable, because that, or 4 million in backlog that isn't profitable, or even 2 million and not profitable backlog, right? If it's not profitable work, it isn't profitable, regardless of how much backlog you have. So don't use that as a vanity metrics. Like, I have all of this revenue coming in. If it is garbage revenue that's going to cost you a small fortune, you're never going to make any money on it. It really isn't worth it. It's not worth the headache. So your backlog is only going to strengthen your company when you're profitable. When you're profitable, you've got good production and cash flow. All of those things need to be aligned, right? Your backlog needs to be aligned with that. Other than that, they're all running their own race at different paces, and they never seem to catch up with each other. So next week we're going to talk a little bit about repeating bad jobs. So again, next week will be the third week in our Profit Leak series. There are far too many of these bad jobs that are out there. We see them a lot with our clients. They've got great work, and then all of a sudden they start to take work just to take work. So let's actually look about repeating that bad work over and over again, just to say we've taken that work. And then we'll talk a little bit more about, poor job costing and how it just becomes a cycle, right? It's just like this contractor cycle, and it's pretty common across the industry, sadly. So if this is happening to you, you are not the only one. But let's find a way for you to break out of it and get you guys in a more profitable place. So as always, we look forward to seeing you here every Friday. We are at the Construction CPA on, let's see, I always forget, Facebook, LinkedIn, YouTube, and Instagram. I look forward to seeing you here every week. And remember, we are dropping the hammer on cash flow problems so you can build things that matter. See you next week.